My name is Joseph Wunderlich. I'm a professor of engineering, architecture, and computer science. This is the fourth part of a lecture series on Frank Lloyd Wright from ages 42 to 47, 1909 to 1914. In this fourth part of the lecture series from age 42 to 47, 1909 and 1914, he first runs off with his mistress, leaving his wife and 6 children. They go to Germany and a little bit in Paris and Austria also, but live in Italy for more than a year. Then he comes back and builds Taliesin on family farmland and his mother's land. Then his mistress is brutally murdered, and that's going to send him into shock, which is how this episode, this time frame ends here. Now, the architecture of that time, while he's in Germany, the Wasmuth portfolio is published, and that's very influential in Germany. This is before we're at war with them. This is before World War One. Then Taliesin gets built, of course, and then many operable windows for health and passive cooling. So he first does that for a family that has children with tuberculosis before he goes to Europe, and then he does it again in a design when he comes back from Italy, living in Italy, and does it even more profound with operable windows. And arguably that's influenced from, even to this day in Italy, they don't believe in air conditioning. In some places they do, demand from tourists, but for the most part they don't. I've been to Italy 6 times. I've lived there teaching, and I can say that's definitely an influence on how I do things when I come home without the air conditioner or clothes dryers if I can get away with it, or wash dishes by hand also. So anyway, sculptures also is arguably influenced. Then when he comes back, he'll have an Italian sculptor sculpt the figures for Midway Gardens that become very popular. And he's also staying in Fiesole in Italy, and I'd stayed there right near where he was, and outside of Florence. Been to Florence a couple times, and so there's plenty of sculpture that's there. That's where the statue of David is, which is a beautiful thing to see. It's worth a line. The first time I went, I didn't want to stand a couple hours in line, but then next time I visited, got up very early. I still waited over an hour in line, but it is worth it. And then there's a whole museum of sculptures there too. So arguably this is where he starts thinking of that kind of thing a little more. And you certainly see it in Midway Gardens when he returns, and that's actually where he's at Midway Gardens when he hears that his mistress is murdered. These are the majority of the references that I've used for this lecture series, and they're worth taking a look at each of them individually when you have time. First, quick review of the other 3 lecture parts of his life and works. Early on, quickly summarizing, influence of his father and his mother. Father, mainly a musician, but many other skills. His mother, a very dedicated homeschooling teacher using Froebel methods. Froebel's draws on nature and Asian thought. Frank Lloyd Wright's also growing up in the farmland at that time. He's living in New England and Wisconsin until 20, and then Chicago and Oak Park. Again, his mother and father. Now he has a wife and 6 children during this time, because we're looking at up to age 42 before we move on to the next time frame. His influences, architects, his professor at University of Wisconsin, Joseph Silsby, his first architect, mentor and employer, Louis Sullivan, the biggest influence of all. And then events during this time frame, he's in his 20s, the Industrial Revolution's going on, building after the Chicago fire, sees the Japanese building the World's Fair, starts his own practice, designs many homes. In his 30s, becoming famous, establishing his organic architecture and prairie style, visits Japan for the first time, and here's a couple most notable designs of Unity Temple and Roby House during this time, but many, many other buildings. This is my own summary slide I'm inserting into all of the lectures based on the refinement of everything Frank Lloyd Wright said, conforming to the site, pinwheel planes, cruciforms, broad chimneys, and long overhangs in the prairie style, certainly folded plane in the form, human scale, form and function R1, simple geometries like the formable blocks, open floor plan, orchestrating the sun, destroying the box, natural state of materials flowing in between inside and outside, bands of windows, framing views, the Engawa, compression and release technique to magnify the final space, natural materials, innovating materials, warm, optimistic tones, and fixtures, furniture built in, music everywhere, music in the architecture itself, inspirations from Japan and Italy. Here's one of his many designs during this period when he's 42 years old that's perhaps very relevant to what's happening right now in the United States in 2020 and all over the world. So clients asked for many operable windows and cross ventilation to help cure their children of tuberculosis, which was very common then. And then I have here, and is a good design concept for COVID-19 today. So this is the Ingalls residence. This is in 1909, 111 years ago. So this flow of air, natural airflow, can be controlled, designed with passive HVAC design, passive cooling design, so not using modern day equipment. This is a 1,000-year-old design. We look at this in my one lecture here. You see linked on the side here, Materials and Methods course, and it's actually looking at an excerpt from my Green Architectural Engineering course. You can find parts of this on my YouTube channel, on my website also. Just a little bit about this virus right now that we're dealing with, and this is from New England Journal of Medicine, showing that the virus does still become a problem in aerosol form. It didn't initially seem to be like that, but it is, and so the buildings need to be designed accordingly, especially cold climates in the wintertime. Everybody's packed in high rises and elevators. You have fresh air circulating around, depending on the type of heating system. Forced air certainly going to push the air around, and similar things in Texas and Florida and Arizona and parts of California in the summer with the air conditioning. So we'll see how the statistics show on that. So the engineers and designers need to mitigate this, and the maintenance, the people in charge of facilities need to retrofit with consulting from the engineers and architects. You can see more on this in my other lectures, not in this lecture, but this is a letter from the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers, ASHRAE. They set the international standards. They're American, but people adhere to these standards around the world. And they're writing a letter to the head of the World Health Organization, warning what's happening. This is March 23rd here, and we're in the middle of July now, and it's still trouble. Then they're making some recommendations, and you can see a little bit of that here. Operable windows, talking about the proper ventilation for the healthcare facilities, certainly, and then also for UVGI, so the ultraviolet and light, and that is something that can be used if it's done properly. Then also ventilation, rates, airflow, filtration, and ultraviolet germicidal irradiation. So they're making specific recommendations, and this is up to the people who deal with buildings. Maintaining them, certainly, maybe more important than building new ones, just maintaining them right now, or retrofitting them as needed. Okay, so now a different topic here, and an important one. Frank Lloyd Wright, he leaves his wife and children. He runs off with the wife of one of his clients, and it is a major scandal, and they kind of flee to Europe. They travel around a little bit and then they settle in Italy. They live in Fiesole, Italy, a town overlooking Florence, FLORENCE, Italia. So they're up on a hillside in Fiesole, Italy, looking down on Florence. Not quite this close-up of the view. Here's the actual place that they stayed, the Belvedere, Villino Belvedere Villa. Here's the door to the Villa Belvedere that they stayed in Fiesole, Italy, looking down on Florence. There's a plaque on the building honoring Frank Lloyd Wright. She has his birth date wrong there. I just noticed on this as I'm saying this. He did fib a little bit about his actual age, and his mother went along with it to make him seem a little more precocious. He was actually born in 1867, but he would fib about being born a little later, so he would seem like a young prodigy a little more. And he was, but he needed to brag or exaggerate, embellish, even when he didn't need to, really. You can see the view here down on Florence from this villa. And here is an aerial view, Google Maps of Florence, Firenze in Italia. You can see the Duomo, dome of Maria del Fiore. And that has a whole story behind it, the Duomo. So Brunelleschi's Dome, a great book. I would highly recommend it. Maybe I'll make that required reading in one of the courses. My son had to read that for part of his schooling. And then you could see the relative location here up in the top right where they lived in Fiesole. Also, you'll see a link here that says read. I'd like everybody to click on that, students certainly, and read this article about the details of when Frank Lloyd Wright lived here. A couple more photos to give you an idea of the beauty of this area and what Frank Lloyd Wright might be seeing. Many of these buildings are very old, very likely are not much different than when he was there. And things in Italy don't change that fast, the buildings certainly, and that's a good thing. A little more of the view, looking over olive trees, I believe, they look like olive trees. And you can kind of make out the Duomo in the upper right a little bit there. And then here is a picture again of where they stayed, and then where I was staying in 2004, very close, in Fiesole. And so Florence, and what he's seeing in Florence, which is right next to Fiesole. You'd see it from where he is. And the Duomo. Michelangelo's David is there also. Definitely worth seeing. And there's a whole museum of sculptures, marble sculptures, connected with this, or as part of this. These are photos taken by my son, Joseph John Wunderlich, in the museum where the statue of David by Michelangelo is located. Then we also visited the University of Florence School of Architecture. Here's my son looking, reading some books in the library of that university. And then we went and purchased some leather jackets. Florence is known for fine leather work. If you're a student listening to this presentation and required to understand and know some of this, I'd like you to click on where it says here. If you're on YouTube, look for the PDF version below in the comments. Otherwise, you'll find the PPTX with audio on my website or in Canvas database. And then also, if you see things on there to click on, other presentations, perhaps one on Roman times and one summarizing what's in these collection of pictures and videos. Look at that too and surf around in there. And then kind of for fun down here on the bottom left, unless I give you specific requirements otherwise, is my Italian personal dictionary, vocabulary, and I've made it so that I can print in color and cut this out and fold it. It fits nicely as a reference in my back pocket, so I don't use the electronics when I'm traveling. I know you can buy real-time on-demand voice translation now. It kind of takes the fun out of it. I like to know some of the language, especially Italian, before I ever travel there, and then you know, don't be looking at my technology when I'm interacting with humans. So this is the type of architecture he would be seeing on the left here as he's staying in Fiesole, Italy, overlooking Florence. This is a design that did not get built, but what he was intending to be a studio residence in Fiesole. And during this time, while he was there, he was making these drawings as part of a publication, a very influential publication in Europe, primarily. The Wasmuth portfolio, that's Wasmuth's the name of the publisher. And so I just have a couple of the images from that included here. So you recognize this is his home and studio in Oak Park from 1889. Also the Hartley residence in Oak Park, and the Roby House in Chicago, and there are many more. I've purchased this book, and there's quite a bit in it. And so then he returns to Madison, Wisconsin. First he lives in an apartment for a couple months in Chicago, and then designs and builds Taliesin on his mother's land. So take a look at these two pictures here. The one on the left is what he would be seeing in Italy when he was there, and then on the right is what he designs immediately after he comes home to the United States. This is the living room of Taliesin in Wisconsin, and you enter from a corner, and then you can see out the other corner, and that's direct exposure, inside, outside, framing the views, similar to Japanese things that he saw first in the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, and then on his first trip to Japan in 1906. So that is now an integral part of his organic architecture, which is certainly implemented in his prairie school designs. And you see here also. This is a floor plan of Taliesin, and you can see in the middle workstations, drafting stations for his apprentices and architects. This complex or this building will become the main site for the fellowship later on, where students come and learn. Then later after that, Taliesin West will open up, and the fellowship will turn into a master's degree program that lasts for quite a while, up until now. It's just recently been moved to a new thing. There's a little falling out between the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust and the school, Frank Lloyd Wright School. We'll discuss that in another lecture. So here's a good video that I recommend you stop now and take a look at, unless you're watching this on YouTube. If you are, there's a PDF below and the link that you can click on when you're done watching this, or you could stop this and come back into this. But if you're watching the PowerPoint with embedded audio, please stop now and take a look, click on this link and watch this video about 28 minutes long by a historic researcher at Taliesin Preservation. And then come back. Now, I always like to bring in my own projects, and I was considering in this project in Pennsylvania that I've mentioned before, where I'm adding over 1,500-foot addition to an old farmhouse, and complementing the designs, the vernacular of the architecture in the area, but also adding new elements, some postmodern kind of designs, the eyebrow windows in a couple places, and you can see one in the bottom right-hand corner. There's a couple more also. But then I was thinking of a tower, before I constructed the whole thing, a tower, and I was taking pictures in Italy in various locations of towers, and so I hadn't really thought about what Frank Lloyd Wright had seen in Italy at the time. This was my own expedition for my own purposes. So this is one of the first designs after he comes back from Italy, and perhaps you can see some of the influence of the Italian architecture in the upper floor with the roof, and how the windows look a little bit different maybe than some of his other designs, but similar to maybe what you've seen in some of the Italian buildings. He's also putting the many operable windows for natural ventilation, which is a very common thing to do in Italy, even though he did do that prior to going to Italy in the one house for the client whose children had tuberculosis, which we've already talked about. And then this is said to be one of his final prairie school style of homes during the peak time. Now, there are other ones after this, but this sort of marks a time where he's transitioning to different ways of design. One more notable design work of Frank Lloyd Wright's during this time period, even though it's only a 5-year time period that I'm looking at here for a reason you'll see in a minute. This is Midway Gardens, originally designed in the south side of Chicago to be a somewhat upscale place. Frank Lloyd Wright even scheduled the things that would go in there, the events and the entertainment. It had shops and entertainment kind of things. It turned into a beer garden, and Prohibition came in. It was a dry kind of place, but it was still a gathering place. Changed ownerships a couple of times. One of the owners changed it so much, Frank Lloyd Wright was very annoyed with them, and then it eventually got torn down. However, these statues, they're called sprites, by an Italian artist, sculptor, became very popular. 2 of them here you see in the bottom right got moved to the Biltmore Hotel, designed by one of Frank Lloyd Wright's apprentices later on. I did visit that. I'll talk about that a little later. It has some similarities to textile houses we're going to see in a little bit that Frank Lloyd Wright designed in California. And you see these replicated now in people's gardens. It's a common kind of design, and I even have a nice chess set with these types of images, forms. So now this is just a list from Wikipedia, just to give you an idea of how prolific he's still designing. So many projects. And there's just too many to cover. If you were going to have a lecture series covering all 500 built designs, it would just take forever. So you just have to pick a couple that to focus on. A couple here that maybe I mentioned a little earlier, just noting that the Avery Coonley School Playhouse, S1.74. That's Storer, by the way, the architectural historian. That book that you can see in the references above. People do use that numbering system quite a bit. And we looked at that already in the design, initial designs of the cruciform. Well, not initial design, but just initially when we're looking at the theory of cruciform. The cruciform had already been around by the time this building was made in the pinwheel planes. And then also the one right below that, the Francis W. Little House, which was demolished. However, they saved the living room and a lot of the windows, and it was rebuilt into the put in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Met. A number of designs here. This is actually a subdivision here. You see this river forest. So you could look at all those. And then a couple more designs here. So we're just looking at a 5-year period here. And so there's plenty more to look at. And this is why we are ending this short time frame here, because his mistress is murdered. So, and you know, it's a big, horrible thing, as you would imagine. It's not something I want to talk about the details of. It's not really relevant to his architecture, except you could see what it does to his life after this, and how you do actually see it in his future designs. We'll talk about it a little bit. You can see that he's in mourning, and so he'll be going out to California after this, and to Japan, far away from. Now please go and take a look at 6 minutes of this video log lecture on YouTube channel that covers this short time period.